Oh, I think someone's mic is on. There we go. We ask all participants if you could just please mute your mic until the Q&A session. That'd be greatly appreciated. So our first segment, led by Professor Greene, will focus on race and hair in a legal space and how these racial inequities have been deeply rooted since childhood and are prevalent in the professional world. Basically, racial discrimination via hair. This discussion is going to be framed around how our hair has impacted our childhood and later our adult lives, how the law and federal courts have perpetuated racial discrimination and using Black hair as a vehicle to do so, and how legislation attends and attempts to stop racial discrimination. Our second segment will be led by Ms. Stephanie Lewis, and she will engage in a critical discussion about how activism is interlinked with courage, self-trust, and being connected with who you are in your mission in life, and then followed by a guided exercise. To introduce two of our amazing speakers today, Ms. Stephanie Lewis is a government attorney, national board certified health and wellness coach, and certified mindfulness instructor. She helps busy professionals, including members of the legal community, skillfully manage stress, increase concentration, and release the barriers to performing and achieving personal and professional goals through coaching, mindfulness meditation, and other mind-body practices. She's also a member of the board of the Mindfulness and Law Society. Stephanie received a BA from Washington University in St. Louis, a Master's of Health Services Administration from the University of Michigan, and a JD and LLM in tax from Georgetown University Law School. Professor Doris Wendy Greene is a trailblazing United States anti-discrimination law scholar, teacher, and advocate who has devoted her professional life's work to advancing racial, color, and gender equity in workplaces and beyond. As the first tenured African-American woman law professor at Drexel University Klein School of Law, Professor Greene's legal scholarship and public advocacy have generated civil rights protection for victims of discrimination throughout the United States. Through her award-winning publications and activism, Professor Greene has crafted a legal blueprint for historic civil rights legislation known as the Crown Act, which has also helped to enforce and shape the stance of EEOC, federal courts, administrative law judges, and civil and human rights organizations in race discrimination cases that often involve discrimination of African descendants who suffer when donning natural hairstyles. Additionally, she's the founder of the Free the Hair movement and a native of Columbia, South Carolina. She has received her BA in English from Xavier University of Louisiana, a JD from Tulane University School of Law, and an LLM from the George Washington University School of Law. So I will now hand it over to Professor Greene, who's going to lead our first segment.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Simone, for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited to be here today with you all. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for guiding this conversation as well. And so essentially, as Simone has already talked about, today we'll talk about Black hair and what's human rights, law, and activism got to do with it. And so really, when we think about natural hair discrimination or discrimination that African descendants suffer on the basis of our natural hair texture and hairstyles like afros, braids, twists, locks, bantu knots, and other forms of, or other styles that we may rock, it really is a pervasive form of racial discrimination that harkens back to eras of racial slavery in this country and abroad, as well as eras of racial apartheid in this country, as well as abroad. For nearly 4 centuries, like our skin color, African descendants' hairstyles resulting from our curly or coily or woolly or kinky hair texture have served as a marker of our racial identity and therefore a vehicle of racial enslavement, segregation, and subordination. Indeed, early American jurists declared a woolly hair texture or hair texture inclined to be woolly signified African ancestry or Blackness, and an individual straight hair texture signified either European or indigenous ancestry, and therefore a person could be consigned to enslavement solely on the basis of their woolly hair texture or the propensity of it being woolly, and the straightness of one's hair could legally render a person free. In the 21st century, one's exercise of freedom in so many different spaces still remains connected to the texture of one's hair. Race-based natural hair discrimination is a common barrier to African descendants' employment and educational opportunities, and even their access to public accommodations and housing. And we see this playing itself out in so many different, public incidences of race-based natural hair discrimination. And this is just one of them that are affecting us in the workplace, not only as it relates to African descendant men, but also African descendant women. Black women around the world are being told that they have to straighten their hair as a condition of employment, being told that they have to wear wigs or weaves in order to cover their natural hair textures, also as a condition of employment. Additionally, we have, research that reaffirms what we probably already know, many of us are already aware of, is that Black women, as well as Black men, are suffering high rates of employment discrimination and barriers to employment opportunities for which they are qualified simply on the basis of their natural hairstyles. And so this is one of the recent reports as it relates to that, where Black women with natural hairstyles are less likely to get job interviews than, say, white women with curly hair, white women with straight hair, as well as Black women with straight hair. Black women, men, boys, and girls around the world who don natural hairstyles and their hair texture are not only losing employment opportunities, whether it be entry into the workplace or also promotions and the compensation that's associated with that. But even in the process in our workplaces, we are often told that our natural hairstyles are unkempt, disheveled, unprofessional, aberrant, radical, militant, unruly, distracting, wrong, extreme, unusual, unattractive, and simply unacceptable. And so in light of this, it has, for me, triggered a whole body of legal scholarship around what I have coined as grooming codes discrimination, which is a specific form of discrimination and inequity that result from the infringement upon one's personhood due to the enactment and enforcement of appearance and grooming mandates or pressures or expectations, which really bear no relationship to one's job performance. These types of mandates or expectations implicate protected classifications like race, color, age, disability, sex, and or religion, among other protected characteristics. This body of legal scholarship and the public engagement that I have engaged in literally across four continents and around the country now over the course of nearly 15 years has manifested itself organically into what I have called the Free the Hair movement or campaign. And what this movement really is about is to increase the public awareness around the systematic and global discrimination that African descendants suffer on the basis of our natural hair and hair textures. It also is to bring about not only legal change, but also social policy and personal change to really try to address those biases that are often associated, negative biases that are associated with natural hair texture and hairstyles, and the privileging of those hair textures that are either straight or have the propensity of being more straight. And so that ultimately African descendants around the world can freely rock our natural hair or freely wear our hair according to our personal needs and desires. And so essentially, one of the major ways in which I've been trying to address this issue is through really trying to reform the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in terms of its protections against race discrimination. Many of you are probably aware that Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act prohibits race discrimination in our workplaces. And very early on, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted, we start to see cases arising whereby African descendant men and women are challenging workplace discrimination, and in particular, grooming codes that have prohibited natural hairstyles like braids and afros and locks. And this is one of the earliest cases that was decided in 1981, and a very similar one, Rogers versus American Airlines, where Renee Rogers was told that she could not don her cornrow braided hairstyle because American Airlines perceived it to violate their grooming policy that that mandated professional and conservative hairstyles. In that case, the court basically, she challenged this as a form of intentional race as well as sex discrimination. And specifically, she said that this ban against braided hairstyles infringed upon a fundamental part of her personhood as a Black woman, and that cornrows were historically a fashion and style adopted by Black American women, reflective of cultural historical essence of Black women in American society. And unfortunately, the federal district court disagreed with Ms. Rogers and said that discrimination against her cornrow braids did not amount to race discrimination, but if the employer had discriminated against on the basis of an afro, then that would amount to unlawful race discrimination. And this is largely based upon a doctrine that was actually reinforced and reaffirmed in a more recent case, EEOC versus Catastrophe Management Solutions, where Ms. Chastity Jones was told that she had to cut off her blonde curly locks as a condition of employment, and that she had already been extended this job offer, and she was told that, I'm not saying that yours are, but they tend to get messy. You know what I mean. And so effectively, similar to what we see in the Rogers case in 1981, the employer basically enforced their so-called neutral grooming policy that mandated professional and business-like images in a way in which they deemed Miss Jones's dreadlocks to be unprofessional and not business-like, and therefore unacceptable, and disqualifying her from this employment opportunity for which she was qualified, and largely based around this doctrine, or this immutability doctrine, that the court adopts in these cases, and harkens back to Rogers versus American Airlines in 1981. And so what basically the courts say in these cases is that Title VII only protects against discrimination on the basis of immutable characteristics, those that you're born with, those that you cannot change, those that are difficult to change, or that all individuals of a particular racial group possess, or that they only possess, which is basically impossible. So what does that mean? Basically, by using this immutability doctrine, what the courts have said is that afros are an immutable racial characteristic of Blackness. Therefore, if an employer discriminates against an afro, that is race discrimination. But if you lock, braid, or twist that afro, then magically it's no longer about race, it's about culture. And since Title VII does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of culture, employers are free to police or engage in what I call the hyperregulation of Black people's bodies via the medium of our hair, and therefore discriminate on the basis of protective and natural hairstyles like locks, braids, and twists, among other types of characteristics that the court has deemed to be mutable cultural characteristics like language or accent or speech, even though these are characteristics that are often associated with one's racial identity, or the ways in which we think about race, or reflects race, and oftentimes animates racial discrimination. So what I've done in the work, starting with my first article that was published in 2008, I tried to offer a definition that would be more expansive, and one that actually reflects the ways in which race operates as a social construct, and therefore the ways in which racial discrimination actually operates, which is that race includes physical appearances and behaviors that society, as well as legal actors, historically and presently commonly associates with a particular racial group, like our skin color, or like our hair texture and our hairstyles, language, accent, among other types of mutable characteristics or changeable characteristics. And so this definition of race, or iterations of this definition of race, has been adopted in what we know as, some of the Crown Acts. And this is the first one out of California that was passed in 2019 and is now law in California. And it defines race as traits historically associated with race, including but not limited to hair texture and protective hairstyles. The Crown Acts have been passed now in 8 states, and these are the states: Virginia, New York, Colorado, New Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut, as well as Washington State. Additionally, municipalities like New Orleans, for example, 17 municipalities have passed either Crown Acts or similar legislation that really clarifies or provides a clarifying definition of race to attend to not only natural hair discrimination that African descendants suffer, but also other types of race-based discrimination on the basis of natural hairstyles. Additionally, this work has informed the New York City Commission on Human Rights enforcement guidance, their groundbreaking enforcement guidance that declares that they will treat natural hair discrimination as race-based discrimination. And this kind of protection not only extends to workplaces, but also public accommodations, private and public schools. Additionally, the ABA has also endorsed the Crown Acts as well as this clarifying definition of race to be used in not only legislation, but also in the enforcement of our civil rights laws, and also to do the very things that you're doing right now, which is to engage in training so that we can deconstruct whether conscious or unconscious biases as it relates to hair texture, style, or appearance of a person's hair. Additionally, I've had the privilege of co-drafting the Federal Crown Act that was passed by the United States House of Representatives in September of 2020. And as you can see, if it becomes the law, it would likewise clarify that discrimination on the basis of characteristics commonly associated with race and national origin in workplaces, housing, public accommodations, and federally funded institutions would violate our federal civil rights laws that prohibit race or national origin discrimination. And this kind of federal intervention is something that I have been advocating for since 2014, actually. I came across this letter here that I sent to the Black women in the Congressional Black Caucus as they were also trying to, and did a very successful job of really reforming or helping to reform the military's grooming policy that barred African-American women, service women from wearing natural hairstyles. And so some of the other advocacy obviously has extended beyond the workplace, including issuing letters on behalf of young women and girls in workplaces who have suffered this kind of discrimination, as well as boys in our African descendant boys in educational spaces. Namely, I've served as a legal expert in a high profile case some of you may be aware of involving DeAndre Arnold and his cousin Caden Bradford out of Texas, who have put forth a thus far successful constitutional claim of sex, race, as well as cultural infringement upon cultural expression discrimination in violation of the First Amendment as well as 14th Amendments, respectively. And additionally, this work has shaped even that the legal arguments of the EEOC and EEOC versus Catastrophe Management Solutions case. And additionally, I've worked with the Legal Defense Fund and not only the litigation involving DeAndre Arnold and his cousin Caden Bradford, but also in filing an amicus brief in EEOC versus Catastrophe Management Solutions. So what is this work really all about? It really is about the business of not engaging in oppression, as Polly Murray, civil rights icon and lawyer, said, is that the business of oppression is not respecting one's personhood. And really what this Free the Hair advocacy really is all about is to ensure that these systemic forms of racial oppression via the lack of respect and the lack of dignity that is being afforded to our personhood can no longer persist.
Thank you so much, Professor Greene, for such an invigorating conversation. We are so grateful to you just for your work as an advocate, for taking the time today to educate us, and truly for pushing all of us to join the free hair movement, because it's essential that Black people globally can live freely with their hair. You know, we must continue to redefine what is deemed to be professional and truly push for the neutralities of Black people to be reflected in the law in our courts. So I personally salute you for all the work that you've done, and me and my hair are greatly appreciative for it. So now I would like to hand the program over to Ms. Stephanie Lewis.
Thank you, Simone. And I also want to thank you, Professor Greene, for all of your hard work and all of your courageous work in being a leader in this effort. And that's what I was asked to talk about today, was about the role of courage and trust in social advocacy and the ways that mindfulness can actually help you cultivate internally that courage and trust and care for yourself in the process of being an advocate, whether you're an advocate on the grand stage or in your own personal context. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I want to engage in a couple of brief practices that will give you a taste of what a mindfulness practice could look like, and some things that you can take away from this session so that you can build it into your life if it resonates with you. So I'm really glad that MILS, the Mindfulness and Law Society, has an opportunity to actually be a part of this particular session, because the social and legal advocacy context is a really rich context in which to practice and cultivate mindfulness, and a context in which the practice can really make a significant difference in your well-being, I think. And you can hear, while Professor Greene talked about the work she did, she didn't talk a lot about all of the challenges that she met along the way in doing that work. And I'm sure she continues to meet along the way when she's in the trenches of advocacy. And so what stands out to me when she talks, underlying all that, as she shares her journey, is the role that courage plays in it. So activism, that's speaking truth to power. That requires a lot of courage. And there's different ways of participating in advocacy, but it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And where does that come from? These are characteristics cultivated in childhood, right? Professor Greene, I think you had parents who were advocates, if I remember. So you're an example of that passion, right? A really deep sense of caring and a deep sense of duty. That the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu says, being loved gives you strength, but loving deeply is what makes you brave. So that really deep sense of caring and integrity, strong internal moral standards. So Brene Brown, the professor and social scientist, she talks about the anatomy of trust. And one of the elements that she sets out is integrity. And she talks about in the context of choosing courage over comfort. You're practicing your values rather than just professing them. And so this is all a part, this intentional choice of advocacy is a courageous choice. So self-trust. You can operate in this space, this advocacy space, confronting discrimination without self-trust, but I would submit that you won't last very long, right? You're going to burn out, you're going to be eaten up with self-doubt, critical self-talk. There's going to be health consequences. Advocacy is a long game. Professor Greene talked about how she started this work, did you say 2014? I think.
Oh, no.
2004?
In 2005.
2005, right? This is a long game, as we know. We're still fighting battles that our grandparents and our great-grandparents fought. We're still fighting the Voting Rights Act issues, right? So this is a long game. And self-trust is essential to being able to sustain yourself in that long game. And in the activism context, it really shows up in a couple of different ways. One is trusting yourself that you can handle what comes up in and around you, that you can operate in spite of the antagonism, in spite of the criticism, the ridicule, the retaliation, the being pushed aside because you stood up to speak your truth, that you can handle the setbacks, that you can come up and work with others for solutions, that you can find the resources, that you can discern where it's best to deploy those resources. All those things are a critical element of self-trust in this space. And trust that not only change is possible, but that you can make a contribution to that change. You're stepping out on faith that you can make a difference and faith that there is a capacity for change to happen and to respond to your efforts. And then lastly, I want to mention the honoring of that trust within yourself. That can show up in terms of honoring your limits, setting your boundaries, awareness of when you're playing the role of the sacrificial lamb. There's so much to do. There's so much to fight for and fight against. There needs to be a capacity for understanding where your limits are and where you have to break the habit of taking the world on your shoulders. And I say this in the context of self-trust because not honoring you, not honoring your own boundaries is a betrayal of trust with yourself. And so self-trust at base is an honoring of yourself, and that's absolutely something worth cultivating. So trust, this is a characteristic that can be cultivated and strengthened, right? It's really a lifelong practice. We're all at different points along the spectrum. And we may have great self-trust in one context, but not in another. We all have work to do in this space, right? And it's one of the foundational attitudes of mindfulness, mindfulness being that intentional, non-judgmental present moment awareness. This is a characteristic that both helps cultivate mindfulness, but also is cultivated by a practice of mindfulness. It goes both ways. And in the mindfulness practice, we generally start with the body when we're talking about something like this, the basic building blocks of life, the breath, recognizing all the ways in which we already do trust implicitly, and also the ways in which we don't, right? Trust, John Gottman said, trust is built in the smallest of moments. And that includes trust for yourself. So we start with the breath, with feeling the ground supporting us, holding us up, movement in the body, an intentional awareness of the small acts in our daily lives, learning where we don't trust ourselves, and if it's emotionally safe for us to do so, getting curious about that as part of the practice, right? We trust the process, we trust the practice, and then we build our trust in ourselves along the way over time. It can be done. But trust actually isn't the only way courage shows up in advocacy, right? Another way it shows up in advocacy is in acceptance. And that's another important part of a mindfulness practice. So we're not talking about acceptance in the sense that things are okay. Obviously, not everything is okay. Discrimination is not okay, whether it's hair or any other context. But acceptance in the sense that this is how things are. This is the lay of the land. This is what we're working with. This is the starting point, right? Without that, it's hard to know what you're fighting against if you don't have an acknowledgement and an acceptance about where things are. And this is, so I just want to say there are a lot of people that, not a lot of people, there are people that think that mindfulness is a feel-good remedy, right? And it doesn't really belong in this hard, tough social justice space. It's going to interfere with peace and tranquility, so on and so forth. And of course, in a mindfulness practice, we are activating the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest response in our bodies. And that's an important part of the practice. It opens us up, gives us space. But that's not really at root what the practice is about. Relaxation isn't the end game. It may be part of the process, but it's not the end game. The end game is the intentional non-judgmental awareness of all things, good and bad, and how we handle that as we come up in our lives. It's not meant to be an escape hatch from reality. And if you're an advocate, you're seeing a whole lot of reality, right? Which can be hard. There are people who walk through their life with rose-colored glasses and you wonder what planet they're living on, right? But you know, this is really about understanding where things are and about even looking beneath your own assumptions about others' intentions and motivations and needs and that type of thing. And this acceptance allows you to better manage your emotions. So in this space, there is frustration, there's anger, and there's fear. You can be as courageous as you want to be, right? But you still experience fear. So learning how to be with that anger in a constructive way, honoring your emotions, understanding that those feelings are there, they're normal, learning how to sit with them in a supportive way with loving kindness. That releases their unconstructed power over you, right? Giving you that space to make a choice. And finally, before we go into a couple of practices, I want to say being courageous in and of itself is not enough. You know, having that self-trust and that acceptance and all of the other things that feed into a courageous advocate isn't enough, because somebody can be courageous and not have a bit of sense, right? We all have worked with or gone to school with people super smart, absolutely no common sense whatsoever, right? So this isn't mindfulness is a way of supporting you in terms of knowing where you are personally and using that to help you make emotionally intelligent decisions. Being more than just courageous. So I know we're limited on time, so I want to go. There's lots more I could say on this, but I want to go into just a couple of really small, really brief practices. They're just a taste, and we'll just flow right in. So we're going to start with an extended breathing practice, and then go into qigong. Qigong is like Chinese yoga, but this is a very gentle practice you can do sitting, called gathering the breath. And then we'll go into a brief basic sitting meditation, okay? So these are ways in which you can activate that parasympathetic nervous system, calm yourself when you're in moments where you need some space, that you need to settle down, to ground yourself. And we can start with extended breathing. It's the exhale that activates that rest digest response. So in this one, if this is right for you, okay, because you don't want to do any practice that isn't right for you from a respiratory, physical, or emotional standpoint. I invite you to extend your exhale. So for instance, if you inhale to a count of 3, then exhale to a count of 6. If you inhale to a count of 4, then exhale to a count of 8, or whatever length is comfortable for you. Okay, and we'll just do that a couple of rounds of this. Take a few minutes to do this, okay? And so you can add to this use of your body, other parts of your body, your hand. I'm going to stand up just so you can see me, but you don't need to stand up. You could breathe, suspending the extended exhale, and add in your arms and do something called, I'm sorry, my computer wants to restart the device. Gathering breath, which is just scooping up the energy around you and just letting your hands slowly float down the front of your torso. Just do that for a couple of times and notice how that feels in your body. Nice, gentle, rhythmic movement. It's the gentleness and the rhythm of the movements that are calming your nervous system. Let's just do that one more time. So, Simone, tell me how I am on time. Do I have time for a meditation?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So, lastly, we're going to do a basic brief meditation. We'll start with the body, we'll go to the breath. And again, participating as you wish, as is appropriate for you. The wonderful thing about mindfulness is that there are different ways of approaching this practice. It could be mindful movement, the mindful sit, the mindfulness of activity in your daily life, and they all inform one another. They all reinforce and inform one another. And so you can start at any of those entry points in terms of developing a practice. So finding your comfortable meditation posture with your body straight and aligned. Your hands resting comfortably in your lap by your side. And your eyes closed or gazing downward, whatever is most comfortable for you. And just checking in with your body, starting with the crown of your head, your forehead, your eyes. Noticing where there might be some tension and allowing that tension to release. And if it chooses not to do so, just letting it be as it is. Your jaw, your neck and your shoulders. The chest, the belly. Hips and the buttocks, feeling them anchored in the seat, feeling the support beneath you. And your hands, as you sweep your attention down your arms, to your hands and your fingers, and just marveling at the fact that without even looking at them, you know that they're there. They're there to help you and serve you. And moving back to the main portion of your body, down the legs, the ankles and the feet. And now moving your attention to your breath. The in-breath, the out-breath. Not trying to control anything. Letting it flow at its own natural pace. Letting the body's wisdom lead. And noticing. Breath knows just what to do. One part of your day where you don't have to do anything, you don't have to control anything. Just let the body breathe. Let it be breathed. Let it nourish you. And just spending a few moments focusing on this miracle of the breath. Allowing your focus to return to the breath whenever your mind wanders, which it will. Bringing your attention back to the breath. And now, expanding your awareness to your surroundings. Bringing some movement back to your body. Wiggling the toes, the fingers. And slowly opening your eyes. Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And we just all really appreciate your insightful words and just for really walking us through those guided exercises. I think it is so necessary to remember that advocacy is a long game, and with self trust being essential for sustaining yourself. And I really hope that everyone remembers to incorporate mindfulness into their daily lives and truly honor their limits and boundaries, but most importantly, themselves. So in the chat, I just put our 5 mutual agreements. I'm also going to share my screen shortly to show you all on the screen as well so that it is present. Um, are you all able to see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fantastic. Well, actually, I think I'll just keep it in the chat for now, just so I can manage who is asking questions. So just before we start, before we open the floor for question and answers, I just want to remind everyone to please be respectful of this space and acknowledge the 5 mutual agreements that I put in the chat. And once that's done, I would now like to open the floor to all the attendees, and you can ask any questions that you may have. If you would like to share any comments, you can use the raise hand function that Zoom has. If you would like to verbally ask your question, if you don't feel comfortable asking your question, you can put it in the chat or personally message me and I can answer your question for you. I see Scott Rogers.
Thank you. Just how wonderful, how much I've learned and a lot of thought and applications. So thank you both very much. Thank all three of you very much. I'm curious, I don't know, Professor Greene, to what extent you're familiar with mindfulness and mindfulness practices, but you've accomplished so much, you're accomplishing so much, and I'm going to assume maybe not a part of your daily life. I don't know. But you're hearing Stephanie articulate an application of mindfulness and its practice to this hard work. And so I'm sort of curious, when you hear some of these practices, how does that connect with moving forward, how it may be helpful back then, how it might have been helpful, or if it was a part of your experience, a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I don't know if mindfulness in maybe the most clearest of senses, or maybe the exact definition was something that I was conscious of as I was doing this work, but I definitely believe that listening to or adhering to a seed that was planted very early on in my life is a reflection of being mindful and listening to those voices, listening to, your intuition about what you are on this earth to do. And we could do lots of different things, but one of the things that I knew very early on, starting at 5 years old, was that to be a racial justice advocate, and specifically as it relates to advancing the rights and the equality and the dignity of African descendants, and specifically trying to address, these forms of racial discrimination. And it just so happened to be part of that is natural hair discrimination. So I was definitely very mindful of that, and the role that I was supposed. How it manifested itself, I didn't know exactly how, but that being said, also I think being very conscientious helped me in terms of developing the legal scholarship, even against not even just the legal scholarship, but even to become a law professor. So I probably should go there. Because people told me I was crazy for even pursuing a career as a law professor, because that's not what lawyers do. You went through all of this school and you want to be a what? And I'm thinking that's a pretty good job. So, and I'm glad I did it. But, really, trusting and, I tried other things, and those were great, what I call divine detours, but really trusting, that I was meant to be an educator, and even to go against sometimes my internal thoughts that, oh, I don't want to be an educator because everybody in my family, they're all teachers, right? So I wanted to do something different. Well, even bucking against that, even those kinds of limitations that we put us upon ourselves. But in terms of mindfulness practices, yes, absolutely. Taking those breaths, actually last night was one of those. I had to do pretty much like 4 or 5 hours of just resting and breathing, deep breaths, to kind of clear some of the anxiety that I was feeling, and feeling about advocacy work and which ways I should go with it. So also taking moments to figure out if this is the way that I should go, and really being very trusting in that intuition, because if it doesn't feel right, then that may not be where I need to spend my energies, where it shouldn't be where I spend my energies, and my time, and my efforts, and ultimately, and that's something that I really try to pay very much attention to, is that intuition and taking the time to breathe, and to reflect and to do those things that are truly a reflection of who I am authentically, and genuinely, as opposed to possibly doing things that other people tell me that I should do, or go in directions that maybe the world tells me that's where I should go.
Ms. Lewis, do you have any responses to the question?
No, actually, I have another question for Professor Greene, if that's okay.
Oh, by all means.
I would actually like to hear you talk a bit about setting of boundaries. You talked about really self-care last night, having to take those breaths and rest. And that was something I imagine you had to learn along the way. Can you share some of that for some of our budding advocates out there?
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I have come to know is that your body will tell you when to stop. And I don't want my body to tell me that, because usually it's in the most extreme ways. So I'm an extremist. I'm like all the way in, or I'm just not. And it is very challenging for me to really get right, sort of like in the middle, or get some balance. And so I have had to really learn how to do that. Because it is against sort of like my personality, just my way of just always being. and also being sort of like engaged in a lot of different things, and that's just part of like even how I grew up with parents who were super active in so many different parts of the community at the same time, managing a professions and children and all these things. And so recognizing that, being busy isn't always productive, and being busy also can really wear on you. Physically and emotionally, as well as physiologically. So yes, it has taken a lot of me of having to trust my body. So that was part of what I was talking about last night. Even though I had two presentations, I had one right before I came with you guys, and I needed to get ready for it. I was like, actually, my downtime is more important. It'll be fine. It will be fine. And if it's not fine, that's okay too. Like just having to learn how to liberate yourself from, I think sometimes being, so-called perfect too, like just letting it go, and, however it's going to be, it's going to be. So yeah, it's taken a lot for me to institute those boundaries. And part of that boundary is to say no to things, even though you may really want to do it, or it's sort of in alignment with, the things that you're doing. Also learning how to say no because it's not in alignment. And that gets back to, that intuition, like, is this really, fueling, where my focus is, right? And where I need to be. And then I think another part of it, thirdly, is something that when I was going through a period of frustration some years ago, as it relates to what I should do, and even thought about, and I'll be honest with you all, even thought about no longer being a law professor because of some of the obstacles and challenges. Even though I was a tenured full professor, I'd actually contemplated doing something different. Didn't know what that was going to be, but what I was told, and listening to, a higher power, listening, and for those who may be spiritual or not, God told me that this is about, it's about not a position, it's about a platform. And that's what I'm using you for, to use the tools to establish a greater platform to help other people. And so really just being mindful of that. And so I don't seek positions anymore. I'm not seeking positions. It's really just opportunities to hopefully use the platform for good and for positive good for folks, not only in this country, but around the world. And that has been so liberating. And it's also helped me to create some really important boundaries. And in part of that is saying no, or not right now.
And I think that's a word, just remembering, just not right now, and be really able to enforce just those self-owned boundaries and feeling comfortable enough to do so. So we received a question in the chat, and one of our attendees would like to know your thoughts on head wraps in a professional setting.
Sure. Yes. Well, I absolutely, that's a part of the Free the Hair movement. And even if you don't have hair, it's still a part of the Free the Hair movement. And so I think that, again, individuals should be able to rock head wraps freely, that, oftentimes they are used for a number of different reasons, obviously, but oftentimes they are an expression of our religious, our ethnic, our cultural identities, and those need to be respected. And not discriminated against. So I'm for them. Which probably doesn't come as a great surprise, even though I don't wear them and I want to learn how to wear them. So that is my next goal. Like, if somebody can give me a tutorial on how to do a head wrap, I'm there.
I definitely resonate. I struggle with the twist and the wrap, and it just doesn't fit right.
Oh my God. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Sounds like a YouTube video.
There's. I just need some time to sit down and just watch it.
It looks like Casey has her hand up.
Yes, Casey Stewart. The spotlight is on you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I attended the part one of this conversation. So to Simone and Professor Greene and Ms. Lewis, thank you so much. Professor Greene, my question, I've done some work. I actually did writing in my master's program about this very thing. as it pertains to the First Amendment and how, hair discrimination is it's a remaining loophole. And I do feel comfortable, talking to employers about things like mindfulness, as Ms. Lewis so perfectly shared with us today. But because it's something that I do still struggle with, I kind of find a struggle with talking to my friends. So I feel comfortable talking to employers about this, but when my friends come to me and say, hey, Casey, I want to wear braids, but I'm nervous, and they've been on their job for 5 or 10 plus years, but the fear of not being advanced, the fear of not going up for promotions, it's a constant fear that I have, to vacillate between different hairstyles. And so while I feel comfortable in talking to employers, I don't think that I've found the correct verbiage to share with my friends, because it's often sometimes a fear of mine. I just got an internship for law school, and it's just like, I want to have a good summer, but does switching my hairstyle, how would that affect me returning, for that internship? So I feel like the conversation is just a little bit more comfortable talking to other people. But when I'm talking to my friends, it's still very much a struggle. So I just wanted to hear any advice that you have on having just an in-house conversation with my girlfriends and how to encourage them to be mindful even to themselves and more compassionate to themselves.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to tell you, I think even Polly Murray's quote really speaks to that, about even sometimes our own self-oppression. And so when we're not necessarily appreciating or dignifying or respecting our own personhood, that we are too engaging in an internal oppression, personal oppression. And we have to speak ourselves out of that, right? I think part of it, and it's challenging, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely challenging to switch to, not really caring about what other people think and how they may perceive your hair and how they may receive you. And that's just in general. It may even be about hair, because I will just say, as people of color in these workplaces, especially if you're talking about predominantly white workplaces, we are constantly having to sort of suppress ourselves and navigate, whether it be the way we talk, the way we dress, the way we wear our hair. That is exhausting. That's exhausting. So to free ourselves from that exhaustion, sometimes it can be something as simple, but as still as courageous and bold as changing our hair. And that can be the starting point, I feel, in terms of true liberation and freedom and agency and autonomy in a way in which you may not have ever experienced before. And I will just say, it is a wonderful thing to not have to care about what other people think, and to go about life freely. And not to say that it won't come with some type of retribution or maybe some discrimination, but on the flip side of that, it can also go with some appreciation and celebration. There are probably people who will be so excited and encouraged by the fact that you do something different, right, than what is the norm. And then in turn, you are creating a real shift in the culture, and breaking down some of these norms that really don't have anything to do with your competencies and your qualifications and your talents and the gifts that you bring to that institution or organization. So I think it's about really just encouraging on that, within yourself and also within your friend groups, really just reminding one another and yourself that, again, you are not your hair in one respect, but also sometimes your hair can be a reflection, truly, in the starting point for true freedom and agency and autonomy. And just really speaking of that in a positive light and not being fearful of the discrimination, but thinking about what you're going to gain from within and what ultimately is going to radiate externally and maybe bring about some real change.
And I would add the importance of them being very patient with themselves as well as they think through this process and, stepping forward in a way that's comfortable for them.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be an
Yeah,
extreme thing. So yeah,
right.
sorry.
No, no, that's the point. That's the point I was trying to make, that this can be done in steps as well
Hmm.
when you're
Baby
trying
steps.
to make change. Particularly, I mean, for some people, this is the purpose. Changing systems and cultures is their life purpose. And for others, that's not the life purpose, but we want to be true to ourselves. And so there's a different way of approaching any issue depending upon what your intrinsic motivation is.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's baby steps. To be clear, it took me a minute
Right,
to get from naturally curly to even wearing like not my own hair, to wearing faux locks. It was a journey.
right,
But I'd say with each, part of that process, I definitely know that it reflected a certain kind of not only energy, but a certain kind of agency and freedom and confidence that had to be cultivated over time. And now I'm to the point where, as you can see, my mother hates the blonde hair. She hates it, but I don't care. I knew it when I was getting it done. I was like, my mom's gonna hate this. And as soon as I walked in the house, she's like, I don't know about that. I was like, okay, but I don't care. And so I think for me, it took it to another level. If I really don't care about what my parents think as it relates to these things, then I really don't care what the employer thinks. That's just on a personal note, because honestly, who's going to be the boss of me would be my mother or my father.
I believe we have another audience question from Lisa. So Lisa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Simone and Nabalsa, for putting on this event. This has been a great presentation from both of the panelists. I appreciate it. And I have a question actually for both of you, please. I'm going to start with Miss Stephanie Lewis first. Miss Lewis, you spoke about discernment, and I try to practice a lot of discernment in my Christian faith. And that helps to temper me. And, even if it's just a matter of just breathing and just, taking it in and being able to calm down the nerves and just keep myself rolling. But in terms of mindfulness, is that rooted in any kind of religion or spirituality?
so the most well-known source of mindfulness is from the Buddhist culture, the Buddhist culture. Here in the US, it's practiced in many respects in a secular way. But what I always like to say to my audience is that contemplative practices come from, all major faiths have contemplative practices. This is the one, the Buddhist community culture has really done an enormous service, I think, to the world, in how well they have developed and integrated the mindfulness practice. But all of us come from faiths that have contemplative practices in it. I also, I mean, for me, my meditation is a lot about be still and know that I am God, right? Be still and hearing that inner voice, that inner reading, connecting with the inner spirit, engaging in centering prayer. So it is not something that needs to be connected to any particular religion, to be of enormous use for you.
No, I agree with you. In fact, I just noticed I'm pre-law, and I've happened to notice that there's a few schools that actually have mindfulness courses, as well as like centers where you can go besides the gym, to practice mindfulness. Thank you. And for Professor Wendy Greene, in honor of you, you've been a great advocate in terms of, legally advocating for race discrimination, and I appreciate you. And I just wanted to find out from you, like I've had experiences in my workplace where if my hair is straight, they're like, oh, I like the way your hair looks like that. You should wear like that more often. And I'm like, like appalled at it. And I don't really know how to respond other than just say thank you and just, move on. I mean, I don't think it's appropriate. And I felt like so very awkward. I'm like, how do I really respond? I feel like they don't like me when I wear my hair natural. And when I do wear it natural, I wear it despite it, but I just feel like I'm looked upon and I just feel alienated really sometimes because most of my counterparts are white.
Mhm.
How do I really respond to that type of, comment?
Well, I think an easy, and I've experienced that as well. And had the same kind of, uh, thoughts like, well, if this is the only time that you're going to compliment me, you must not really
Right.
like, when I'm wearing my hair naturally. And what does that really mean? Right. And how does it manifest itself, especially in like workplace decisions? I think, yeah, similarly, when somebody gives you a compliment, you just immediately say thank you, right? And you keep it moving, but you may be thinking about it later on. I think now, I would probably just, if anyone ever said that to me, I would say, why do you like it better? And get them to think about why. And then that can spark possibly a conversation, or at least it lets you know where their head is. and,
Right,
and,
right.
to the extent they can even answer it, because they may not even really fully appreciate, why.
Right.
It would just be something that they're so accustomed to, seeing straight hair, and they associate it with, being attractive or beautiful. It could be where, oh, it's just different. And, it's nice. I appreciate the so-called difference, whether it's straight or it's all these other things, or it may get them to say, actually, I like your hair in all of the different ways. You just never know how the conversation is going to go. But I think most
Thank you.
importantly, it's not for you, to the best of our abilities, to not to try to take on sort of like, because we don't know, and that creates, not knowing sometimes creates a level of anxiety, but really shifting it back to them having to explain themselves and think about why is it that this is warranting, or at least they believe it warrants some kind of a compliment, and as opposed to
Thank you.
things.
I will do that. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
And I think just to add to Professor Greene's point, sometimes you have to really think about why it was so unsettling to you, and then respond with, what do you mean by that? A really simple question. And then with that simple question, that makes them think about, oh my goodness, why did I say that? And that's the thing with words, once they leave your mouth, you can't force them back in. And so, and again, with this entire conversation being surrounded around mindfulness, I think even being so secure and confident within yourself to ask that question to someone else will make them think of, okay, whoa, I need to be mindful of the things that I say and how I engage and interact with other people that may not have the same characteristics or traits that I do.
Thank you.
We have
because I imagine they probably don't even know the impact of what they're saying to you. Some people may not know, right? They're just thinking, oh, I'm just giving a compliment because I think it's pretty, or I think it's lovely, it's different, da 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 da, I see you differently, but not realizing, again, the kind of the privileging, right, that's been associated with straight hair, and the denigration of, and the stigmatization of our natural hairstyles. It runs deep. It runs deep. And I can just say, even from a personal perspective, I remember my grandmother, love her dearly. And I know she loved me dearly, but she would say, especially when my hair was like bone straight, that was like the time that she really complimented me, as opposed to when she had to deal with my very thick curly hair, that I felt like, she really was going to battle with it. So so I was again, at a very young age, very mindful of that, and probably, in some ways, maybe that's part of this journey as to why I'm so committed to this cause. But yeah, so, and a lot of people don't know that about our experience. So they may not even understand the impact or the consequence of even something as simple as providing a compliment.
Thank you. That's true.
Well, we are reaching the end of our program, but Professor Greene, Ms. Stephanie Lewis, thank you both for everything that you taught us today, as well as your just insightful responses to our fantastic audience questions. So I'd like to thank you both. I would like to thank Chapin Shimino. I would like to thank the Mindfulness and Law Society, our 53rd National Chair, Rachel Barnes, our National Treasurer, Ayana Waldhall Murphy, and I truly hope that you all enjoyed our program today and were truly able to walk away with something new. And I hope that you all will attend future NBLSA events.
And thank you, Simone, for your wonderful guide and moderation of this program. You did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to all. This is wonderful, and I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation and exchange. And thank you so much, Chapin, to my colleague for inviting me to this. And I'm so honored to be with you too, Stephanie. Thank you.
Yes, it was an absolute pleasure to be on this call with you.
Wendy, you get a whole new star. You really fit that all into 20 minutes. I am just incredibly impressed. I am like,
Thank you.
the roof.
400 years in 20
That
minutes.
was great. That was amazing.
Who knew I could do it? I didn't think I could.
I didn't know it was possible. Forget, any person. I didn't think it was possible. Anything is possible. You've shown us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, hopefully we'll see everybody in April for the next one. Stay tuned for date and location, time, etc.
Everyone be well.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So, Simone, Ayan actually wanted to ask you a question about a completely different topic.
Yes,
Waiting
ma'am.
for other people to move off.